So as they did last year, Red Barrels have released Primetime, but this event is Primetime 2.0, and it sees Prime assets such as Coil, Gooseberry and Franco walking around a map that isn't their map per se. As expected, 2 Prime assets in a map at one time delivers some pretty tense moments. But the reason you are here is that we've got some tasty new lore documents to chew on, and these are some very tasty documents indeed, as well as a sneaky teaser. So let's not waste any more time and let's jump right in. But first, some context. On the 12th of April 1960, it was reported that someone had escaped the confines of the trial environment after a Project Countdown trial. This someone was Amelia Collier, who had built up quite the following, with another reagent carving the word egregore, which is one term for a collective consciousness, into a body inside the environments. Amelia lived in the walls, so to speak, and had a secret safe room down in a disused section of the Signala facility, in biohazard disposal, and she got to work in having the reagents having her engineer an escape attempt. She even got Noakes to help out too. All whilst this was happening, Murkoff's Director of Historical Refinement, a fancy term for Murkoff's cleanup guy, Clyde Perry, was finding out more about Amelia and was hunting her, basically. Amelia's meticulous plan involved messing with and sabotaging the sleep room terminals and redirecting the trial shuttle to the biohazard disposal area, where the reagents, quite painfully, got fed through an equipment harvesting machine, avoided Henrietta Grubbs, and ventured out into the Arizona desert. Freedom. But not for most, as it was implied in the last update, Project Relapse, that these reagents may possibly end up in the arms of Papa Noth and his cult when Noth gets activated by Murkoff. Watch this space, I guess. Anyway, Amelia's escape was not meant for her, as on the 24th of April she was caught. This ended in a showdown between her and Clyde, in which she tricked Clyde into stepping on a blinding mine and he got separated from his legs via trial shuttle. Anyway, Clyde died, with his death not being reported publicly as of yet, and Amelia was strung up in the sleep room with her being used as an example. A sort of sleep room Jesus. And she was being fed what in hindsight seems to be oxygen. I initially thought it might be some kind of psychosis gas. I say she was strung up as she is now gone. Oh, and rebirth programs have stopped too, which is another one of Easterman's ideas, this time for intensified trauma, that the reagents will become addicted to the therapy. And this leads us into the new lore we got in this update. Right, now we get into the first set of documents, or new storylines, if you will. The After Amelia storyline takes place 4 days after she had been strung up. The first document in the set is Easterman writing in his journal again. Remember, after Easterman had a meltdown and was living on a diet of gin and amphetamines, he is now, in an almost creepy way, surprisingly calm. He's talking about the sun again and is staying upbeat, preferring to see what comes from the chaos rather than worrying about the chaos that just happened. He earmarks a particular reagent, Reagent 0741. Reagent 0741 is someone we've seen mentioned before. He was mentioned in a document from Season 1 from the 12th of April 1960 titled Labrat, in which 0741 was separated for interrogation, as not only was he the only one they had managed to identify from the trial in which Amelia escaped, but he was the one who initiated the trial. Well, we now get a name for 0741, and that is Theo Nordaker, who Easterman claims to be a pervert and masochist, but someone who has no outside connection to Amelia. He claimed to remember nothing of Amelia's escape, but according to Easterman, Theo didn't appear to be lying. Easterman talks about the strands of web being there, connecting them all. This again links into the egregore, the collective mind. He then talks about needing to investigate the sleep room staff too. He then, of course, after finding out that his brother's death after Korean brainwashing was a lie, that the real cause of death was being kept from him by Murkoff, again sees the positives, implying that they're on the verge of breakthrough. As he puts it, crisis is potential. So Easterman goes and speaks with Theo. He's asking him about the egregore, which Easterman defines as a collective complex of unconscious archetypes. Group thought with an emergent will. This is a notion that Amelia's followers were apparently obsessed with. 0741 is asked what he knows, and he starts talking about his medicine. And then when pressed on it further, Theo starts crying and mumbling something that is inaudible. That's all we've got on Theo, but it's very interesting that we've now got another named reagent in the facility. But yes, where's Amelia gone? Well, a document states that on the 1st of June 1960, Amelia had been moved to urgent care. This was under the orders of Easterman, who clearly feels that he's made his point in making an example of Amelia to the sleep room citizens. It's noted that she was experiencing hypoxia and dehydration. Easterman had made it clear that her survival was high priority. Murkoff have special plans for her, no doubt. After the death of Clyde Perry, Signala is undergoing restructuring. Avianos wrote to a man named Silas Knisley, and the more eagle-eyed of you Outlast 1 players will recognise the name. His portrait was hanging on the wall in Mount Massive right next to Clyde's, with his title being Human Resources and Corrections. Anyway, Avianos' correspondence to him shows that they've produced a budget proposal for Mount Massive and Signala to work together, sourcing subjects for Lathe, the name of the trial program if you're new here. Those of you that are not new here will remember that Project Lathe is in its second phase, and Lathe version 1.0 got canned as too many people died. Those subjects for Lathe 1.0 were subjects from Mount Massive. These subjects were deemed unsuitable candidates for the therapy because they were too unstable and too broken. Now, is this one of Avianos' crafty plans to sabotage Easterman, since she knows how Lathe went before? What's interesting is the note scribbled on the bottom of this correspondence. It mentions Clyde's death, and for Silas to note that any rumours he's heard about Signala are exaggerated, and he mentions that they need bodies. He also mentions Judas Goats. Judas Goat, according to the dictionary, refers to someone who betrays followers or dependents, in this case reagents, often unwittingly and as the tool of an enemy, in this case Murkoff. It seems that they may be looking for someone who can infiltrate Amelia's followers group in order to find out what her end goal was and report it back to Easterman. One thing to end this section on is that we seem to be meeting many people from the portraits in Outlast 1. We were introduced to Olivier Baranchik in his early correspondence with Easterman, we've met Clyde Perry, and we've now been introduced to Silas Knisley. A slightly related note, one of the other portraits on the wall from Outlast 1 is Father Thomas Wilter, who served as a priest at Mount Massive until 1966. Father Thomas Wilter is blind in one eye, looks like an injury, and it looks like he's been through some stuff. Maybe he's a reagent himself. So you all remember Moses Scarfiotti, right? Architect of the trial environments. How he expressed his displeasure at the introduction of a shuttle switching system for its flaws in terms of security. I mean, he did have a point on that, since that was how Amelia helped loads of reagents escape. Well, it seems that any security concerns are being swept aside in favour of scientific advancement, and in a conversation between Easterman, Avianos and Scarfiotti, they begin by talking about how Amelia's followers are giving reagents hope by spraying "I'll be back" on the walls inside the environments. Easterman worries that the therapy, since it leaves the reagents vulnerable to any charismatic influence, has led to the reagents building Amelia into an imaginary psychopomp, which refers to a being that guides deceased souls to the afterlife, almost like a deity. He says that the reagents are hungry for leadership, for godheads. Easterman says they need more exposure to the Prime assets and suggests bringing back Prime Time again, including Franco Barbie in there. Scarfiotti again is concerned about the trial environments. A few days later, another meeting takes place between the three, and they are discussing something that is going to happen within the trials, and Scarfiotti is freaking out again. Eastman reveals that he's bringing former Unit 731 scientist Jun Kusamura back to Signala after he was previously sent to Los Alamos after the Amelia chaos started getting out of hand. You'll recall from the previous update that after being sent away from Signala, Kusamura wrote to Easterman about Crest Chemical, and he mentioned some sort of scientific possibility, but good old Easterman didn't respond as he was going through his meltdown. Anyway, on the 13th of May, MK Ultra director Sidney Gottlieb wrote to Avianos and said that he's spoken with Kusamura and is intrigued by the chemical advancements inside Signala. He sees them as outside the purview of Lathe, but he sees something called the Crest process being able to provide long-term conditioning. In the last primetime, reagents were tasked with breaking the televisions, and on these TVs was a first look at what then was to be the next Prime asset, which turned out to be Franco Barbie. This time round we got the same, and there are two different images shown. This raises the possibility of a duo Prime asset. The Minotaur, possibly a couple. If Easterman's trying to focus on creating a family archetype with Coyle being the father, Gooseberry being the mother, Franco being the screaming baby, then these two new primes could represent the grandparents. Maybe. But a bit more about them. We previously learned from a report from Clyde, back when he was a collections agent in 1957, that he'd found something known as the Buffalo Minotaur, and that they, I guess, had racked up quite the body count. The Kress family owned a company, Kress Chemical, that, well, manufactured chemicals, and this was a company that had enjoyed a relationship with Murkoff for a long time. In the meeting with the terrible trio of Easterman, Avianos and Scarfiotti, they're discussing something being allowed inside the trial environments, and this obviously involves chemicals as they're bringing Kusamura back in. Avianos mentions one half of this prime duo, the woman, had learned Japanese just to speak with Kusamura about chemical science. From their pictures on the screen, it seems she may be the brains and the big guy is the brawn, quite similar to the Nick and Laird dynamic from Outlast 2, but we'll see of course. Anyway, I'm really excited to see a new prime asset, or two, in the trials. Given the chemical aspect, it could be that this prime is a projectile throwing prime. Maybe the big guy carries around the lady on his back, and she throws hallucinogenics at reagents, much like the picture throws Molotovs. And maybe these hallucinogenics result in the reagents seeing the prime as a Minotaur. Avianos then mentions something interesting at the end. We always said we could create politicians. Easterman corrects her to thought leaders, which of course is a term he uses to describe charismatic leaders such as Ho Chi Minh, Chiang Kai-shek, and Adolf Hitler. In a new storyline titled Politics, Murkoff's CIA liaison, Jameson Lawler, and Avianos are in a meeting on the 27th of May 1960. Remember that previously Avianos, after being blackmailed by Easterman about her secret romance with Lawler, had told him they should cool things off a bit. But she didn't explain to him what was happening at Sinyala in terms of mass escapees, but in their current meeting, she does. Lawler talks politics and mentions a place called Sverdlovsk in the USSR. Sverdlovsk is the place where 26 days earlier, US pilot Gary Power's U-2 spy plane was shot down whilst in Soviet airspace. This was an incident that led to the cancellation of the Paris summit, which had been arranged in order to discuss the situation between East and West Germany, arms control, and also to discuss relief in tensions between the USSR and the USA. What came next was President Eisenhower refusing to apologize for the US's spy program, and by the time Lawler and Avianos' meeting took place, Eisenhower had already admitted full knowledge of both the program and that particular flight. Lawler mentions a kid called Jack Kennedy, who has a rich dad. He's of course talking about the JFK. He mentions Alan Welsh Dulles, who got fired by JFK after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in Castro's Cuba. This led to theories that the CIA were involved in the assassination of JFK in December 1963. Anyway, Lawler says Dulles had been acting erratic, with his brother John's death from colon cancer being a contributing factor. Avianos goes on to tell Lawler that they may be able to help, that they have a vector on political will, and mentions Kress Chemical. Could one of the Murkoff reagents have carried out JFK's assassination on behalf of the CIA? Could they be creating future politicians? Certainly possible. But that's it for this lore roundup from the Outlast Trials. A lot happening at Sinyala and a heck of a lot to look forward to as well. I can't wait to see the new prime assets. Let me know what you are most excited about in the developing lore for Trials, whether that be the Kress Chemical arc, the Easterman arc, the Theo Nordaker inclusion. Go and check out my other Outlast videos where I've covered every update to the game thus far. Subscribe if you're new here and leave a like as it massively helps this video. But for now, take care and I'll see you in the next one.